Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling something pretty interesting, I think. It's the impact of biases on autistic adults.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Specifically, we're going to be exploring egocentric and altercentric biases,
Mhm.
two tendencies that can really influence how we see the world, right, and interact with others.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a fascinating area. And, it's even more interesting because these biases they're not unique to autism. We all experience them to a
Yeah.
certain degree.
Right. Yeah.
But understanding how they might be, a bit different for autistic adults, I think can offer really valuable insights into the dynamics of communication, of social
Oh,
interaction.
definitely. It's all about gaining a deeper understanding, not just, labeling or categorizing.
Exactly.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
Can you give us a quick rundown of what egocentric and altercentric biases are?
Absolutely. So in simple terms, egocentric bias is the tendency to overemphasize our own perspective.
Oh,
It's
okay.
like having a spotlight
Uh,
shining on our own thoughts and feelings, which makes it sometimes difficult to grasp what others are experiencing.
so it's kind of like being stuck in your own head
Yeah,
and maybe missing those subtle social cues that tell us to kind of shift gears or consider another viewpoint.
exactly. And then we have altercentric bias, which is kind of the flip side. It's when someone is overly focused on the feelings and perspectives of others, often, to the point where it becomes overwhelming.
Yeah, so it's like being a super sponge soaking up all the emotional energy around you,
Yeah.
which can be really draining, especially in like social situations.
Precisely. And, for autistic individuals who might already be experiencing heightened sensory sensitivities, this can lead to a sense of overload and make it challenging to distinguish their own emotions from those of others.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned that everyone experiences these biases to some extent,
Hmm.
but how do they play out like differently in autistic adults? What makes their experience unique?
That's a great question. I think to understand this, we need to consider some of the core characteristics of autism, particularly challenges with theory of mind and central coherence.
Okay. I'm familiar with those terms, but could you just give us a quick refresher
Oh, of course, yeah.
for our listeners who might not be?
So theory of mind refers to the ability to understand that other people have their own thoughts, their own beliefs and perspectives
Yeah.
that might differ from our own. And central coherence is about how we process information.
Okay.
Autistic individuals often have a strong preference for details and patterns,
Hmm.
sometimes, at the expense of seeing the bigger picture.
Okay, so how do these relate to egocentric and altercentric biases?
Well, if someone has difficulty with theory of mind, it can make it harder to step outside of their own perspective
Hmm.
and, consider other viewpoints, which can contribute to egocentric bias. And a strong focus on deep, potentially overlooking the overall emotional tone, or the other person's intentions,
Okay.
which could exacerbate either bias.
That's really insightful. So it's not just about personality or character flaws. It's about understanding how these biases are connected to the fundamental ways, right,
Yeah,
in which autistic individuals process information and navigate the social world.
exactly. And this is where the concept of double empathy comes into play. It suggests that communication breakdowns often happen because autistic and non-autistic individuals are essentially working with different sets of social rules and expectations, leading to misunderstandings on both sides.
It's like trying to have a conversation with someone speaking a different language, even though you're both technically using the same words, right?
Right, yeah.
The meaning can get lost in translation.
That's a perfect analogy. And this is why it's so important to move beyond simply labeling behaviors as good or bad,
Yeah.
and instead focus on understanding the underlying reasons why someone might be acting in a certain way.
Absolutely. It's about fostering empathy and understanding, not judgment. Now I'm curious to explore how these biases play out in real life situations.
Let's do that. We can start by examining how egocentric bias might affect an autistic adult in the workplace. So let's imagine a team meeting where a new project is being brainstormed.
Okay, so we're in a classic conference room setting,
Mhm.
whiteboards, markers, maybe a few nervous glances exchanged.
Right.
What happens next?
Well, an autistic team member with a strong egocentric bias,
Okay.
they might have really innovative ideas, but struggle to present them in a way that invites collaboration.
So they might be so focused on their own vision that they unintentionally steamroll over other people's suggestions.
Exactly. They may miss those subtle cues that suggest, a colleague is about to offer a different perspective, or they might become defensive if their ideas are challenged.
That makes sense. It's like they're so passionate about their own approach
Yeah.
that they forget to create space for other voices in the room.
And this can lead to, friction within the team, making it harder to reach a consensus and move the project forward effectively.
It's almost like they're trying to conduct a solo symphony instead of playing in an orchestra,
Yeah.
where each instrument contributes to the overall harmony.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, let's consider how altercentric bias might
Okay.
manifest in a workplace scenario. Imagine an employee who consistently takes on extra tasks,
Okay.
even when they're already overloaded.
Ah, the classic people pleaser.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that tendency.
Yeah.
But how does altercentric bias contribute to this pattern?
Well, someone with a strong altercentric bias is really, really attuned to the needs and emotions of others, sometimes to the point where they prioritize those needs above their own.
So they might agree to unrealistic deadlines or take on responsibilities that aren't really theirs
Right.
because they don't want to disappoint anyone or cause conflict.
Precisely. And while this might seem admirable on the surface,
Yeah.
it can quickly lead to burnout, resentment, and even difficulty advocating for their own needs in the workplace.
It's like they're carrying the weight of the entire team's emotional baggage
Yeah.
on their shoulders, which isn't sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. And this highlights the importance of strategies
Okay.
for managing these biases, not just in social situations,
Right.
but in all areas of life.
So how can autistic adults navigate these challenges both in the workplace and their personal lives?
Well, one of the most effective strategies is mindfulness.
Okay.
By practicing mindfulness techniques, individuals can become more aware of their own thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations in the present moment.
So it's about hitting the pause button on autopilot and becoming an observer of your own internal experience?
Exactly. And this, increased self-awareness can help you notice when you're slipping into egocentric or altercentric patterns.
Okay.
And that gives you the space to choose a different response.
Like becoming the director of your own mental movie, right? Yeah. Editing out those unhelpful scenes.
Right.
And adding in some more positive ones.
Another valuable strategy is social skills training,
Okay.
which can help individuals learn how to read social cues more effectively,
Yeah.
practice active listening, and develop strategies for clear and empathetic communication.
So it's like learning the secret code of social interaction, right?
Yeah.
Decoding those nonverbal signals and responding in a way that feels authentic and appropriate.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this type of training can be incredibly empowering, especially for autistic adults who might have felt excluded or misunderstood in social settings.
It's about leveling the playing field, giving them the tools they need to navigate those social situations with confidence and grace.
And then there's cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT,
Mm-hmm.
which can be incredibly helpful for identifying and challenging, negative thought patterns that might be contributing to these biases.
So, for example, if someone tends to catastrophize or assume the worst in social situations,
Yeah.
CBT can help them develop more balanced and realistic perspectives.
Exactly. And by reframing those negative thoughts, individuals can reduce anxiety, improve their self-esteem, and build stronger relationships.
So it's not about erasing those thoughts altogether,
Right.
but rather learning to manage them in a healthy way.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And finally, and this is crucial, seeking support from other autistic individuals.
Yep.
Therapists specializing in autism or support groups
Mm-hmm.
can provide a sense of community, understanding, and shared experiences.
It's a reminder that you're not alone in this journey, and connecting with others
Yeah.
who understand your unique perspective can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And by sharing strategies and offering encouragement, these communities can create a safe space for growth and learning.
Now, we've focused a lot on how these biases can create challenges,
Yeah.
but are there any potential advantages or positive aspects?
Oh, that's an insightful question.
Yeah.
While the challenges are definitely important to acknowledge, it's equally important to recognize that these biases can sometimes have positive implications. For example, a strong ego-centric focus can be channeled into incredible passion and dedication to one's interests.
Okay.
This can lead to significant achievements in fields that require, Deep focus
Mm-hmm.
and a willingness to challenge conventional thinking.
So it's about harnessing that intensity
Yeah,
and directing it towards something meaningful and productive.
exactly. And altercentric bias, while potentially overwhelming, can also foster deep empathy and compassion, leading to strong relationships and a desire to help others.
It's like having a heightened sensitivity
Hmm.
to the emotional landscape, which can be a gift if channeled effectively.
Precisely. And this brings us to a crucial point.
Hmm.
Understanding these biases is not about labeling or pathologizing.
Right.
It's about recognizing the full spectrum of human experience and
Hmm.
appreciating the unique strength and challenges that come with different ways of thinking and perceiving the world.
It's about celebrating neurodiversity,
Exactly.
not trying to erase it.
Now let's shift our focus to how these biases might manifest in personal relationships.
So how might these biases affect personal relationships? Could you paint a picture of how these tendencies might play out in that context?
Well, let's consider a romantic relationship where one partner is autistic and has a strong egocentric bias. This individual might struggle to fully grasp their partner's emotional needs or unintentionally dominate conversations.
Okay, so they might miss those subtle cues that, suggest their partner is feeling unheard or needing some extra support.
Exactly. And this can lead to misunderstandings, feelings of frustration or resentment on both sides. Now imagine the other partner in this relationship has a strong altercentric bias.
Okay, so they're highly attuned to their partner's emotions and potentially, putting those needs above their own.
Mm.
What could be the downsides there?
Well, they might find it difficult to assert their own needs or set boundaries, which can lead to an imbalance in the relationship.
So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, One partner might be struggling to step outside their own perspective, while the other is potentially losing themselves in their partner's world.
Precisely. And this highlights the importance of open communication, understanding, and a willingness to compromise in any relationship, but especially in those where partners might be navigating these biases.
So what strategies could help couples in this situation? Would those same tools we discussed earlier, like mindfulness, social skills training, CBT, be helpful here too?
Absolutely. Mindfulness can help both partners become more aware of their own patterns and how those patterns might be impacting the relationship. Social skills training can improve communication and empathy, and CBT can address any underlying anxiety or negative thought patterns that might be contributing to conflict.
It's like giving both partners a toolkit for building a stronger and healthier relationship, even when those biases are at play.
Exactly. And this brings us to a broader point. While we've been exploring these biases in the context of autism, it's important to remember that these tendencies are part of the human experience.
Right, we all have moments when we get stuck in our own heads or swept up in the emotions of others.
Precisely. And by understanding these biases both in ourselves and in those around us, we can create more compassionate and fulfilling relationships, regardless of neurodiversity.
It's about recognizing that everyone has their own unique way of perceiving and interacting with the world, right?
Yeah,
And that those differences can be sources of strength and connection rather than division.
I couldn't agree more. And this is where the concept of neurodiversity truly shines. It's about embracing those differences, not trying to erase them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I want to encourage listeners to consider how these biases, both egocentric and altercentric, might be showing up in their own lives and relationships. Perhaps there are times when you get so caught up in your own world that you miss cues from others. Or maybe you find yourself constantly absorbing the emotions of those around you, leaving you feeling drained and depleted.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own behavior and asking, am I unintentionally creating distance in my relationships? Or am I giving so much of myself that I'm losing my own sense of self?
Those are powerful questions. And by honestly reflecting on our own patterns, we can start to make conscious choices that lead to healthier and more fulfilling interactions.
It's about moving beyond judgment and embracing the beautiful messiness of human connection, with all its complexities and contradictions.
Exactly. And by doing so, we create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued, regardless of how their brains are wired.
That's a beautiful vision to end on. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been an enlightening conversation. My pleasure. I always enjoy exploring these fascinating aspects of human behavior.
And to our listeners, keep diving deep and keep exploring the world with curiosity and compassion. Until next time.